Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me here today. I've really enjoyed it so far. So I'm hoping to tell you a little bit about plug and drive, and then a bit about EV trends and what's happening in Ontario, in Canada, and then around the world. And then what I'm really hoping is that you'll have questions for me and we can have a bit of a dialogue. And you know, it's exciting times actually for folks in this space, because there is so much happening, and I hope by the end of it you'll be convinced, you know, your next car is going to be electric. I've been working on this for about 10 years. I began actually working on electric vehicles when I was still working at Ontario Power Generation about 10 years ago as VP of Sustainable Development. And the thing that happened at that time, 2007, 2008, was OPG was going off coal, and suddenly our footprint from electricity was going way down. And at the same time, Ontario had this massive surplus of electricity off-peak. We have, basically, the Ontario system runs, for those of you who are in that electricity world, runs pretty much on nuclear and run-of-the-river hydro. And most of that runs 24/7. You know, we don't turn it on and off. And so because of that, when demand drops off in the evening and on weekends, we have this very large surplus of what is clean, pretty low-cost electricity. We also have time-of-use prices. So I started around 2007, 2008, I had this aha moment when we heard the Chevy Volt was going to be made, and we heard about the Nissan Leaf, and I thought, oh my God, if we could just get people to plug in cars at night, we've got a winner, because not only are we going to drop our emissions substantially, we're also going to do an economic favor for our province that was dumping that nighttime surplus every night into Quebec and into New York State at a loss. And we still actually do that pretty much every night. And so, you know, as someone who works in sustainability, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, you're often, pitching ideas to executives, and you're saying you should do these things, they're good for the environment, but often there's like a higher economic cost, and you have to try to justify that. But this is one of those cases where actually the environmental benefit and the economic benefit line up, because you have the great environmental, you've got a huge emission reduction, you've got an economic benefit to the province, and also, as you heard from Sanjeev, a big economic benefit to the individual consumer as well. So it should all be obvious that people should want it, right? It's a lot less obvious than you might think. Those of us in this room, maybe that just makes 100% sense. I have to say, when I made these kinds of talks in 2008, I just got like all blank stares. People did not have a clue what I was talking about. And it's taken a long, long time. And unfortunately, though, I think in the consumer world, now I think in the electricity world, people are on it. They get it. In the consumer world, we're still at a point of very minimal knowledge in terms of the benefits. And this is where there's a big, big gap. And I'm going to present some data, given the theme of this conference, about that and what we need to do to solve it. And I think this is very applicable to any province, by the way. A lot of this data comes from Ontario, but I think this educational gap is actually even more pronounced in provinces that have not had rebates like your own. So this picture is at the front of our EV Discovery Center. If you're in Toronto, at some point, you gotta come. It opened in May of 2017. That's mostly my board of directors and the then Minister of Environment for Ontario. And the idea of this place was pretty simple. Dealers didn't have the cars on the lot, and if they did, a lot of the time they didn't have the knowledge necessary to sell them. And we had this idea, what if we brought all the makes and models of cars together in one place, and people could come and just learn, test drive all the different cars, get all the knowledge they need in a totally no pressure, no sales environment. And when we first started pitching this idea to folks, they thought, well, the dealers sell cars. Like, what is this needed for? And the data actually shows this kind of model or something similar is really needed, because we still have a gap between what the dealers can do and what the consumers need. And hopefully that the data will show that. So this is just to show, I mean, the environmental benefit of EV, and I think everyone's pretty much on the page at this point, but in Ontario, transportation is actually the largest emitting sector. I'm not sure about here in Nova Scotia, I think it's number 2. But in most provinces of Canada, it's either number 1 or number 2. And so if we're going to hit our climate goals of any kind, you got to tackle transportation. It's a huge, huge source of the problem. And the really interesting thing in Ontario, and actually moving that way here as well, is electricity used to be the problem. We used to run a lot of coal plants, and electricity was actually the largest emitting sector only about 10 years ago. And now electricity's gone from the problem to the solution, which is a pretty amazing change of events, which is possible really everywhere as more renewables come on the grid and as more coal and gas go off the grid. So we see this huge opportunity as electricity makes the switch. So in terms of data and what we've learned, we survey a lot of consumers. And if you're really into that kind of data, we have much more detailed study on that's available on our website. But I'll just boil it down for you, sort of the highlights of the study. We interviewed 200 EV owners in the Greater Toronto Area and 1,000 gas car owners. And we asked them a whole series of questions around why they chose what they chose, if they were a gas car driver, why they did not choose electric, had they considered it, and if they had, why they didn't do it. And we can kind of boil it down to some very simple facts. Number 1, consumer knowledge. The consumers do not know what's available. They don't know why it's better. They don't know why it's good for the environment. They don't know that they'll save money. And they don't know which makes and models are even available. If you ask the average person, even a pretty educated person, how many different EVs do you think there are? Someone who thinks they're being really bold will say 10. There are 40 plus makes and models of EV, that counts plug-in hybrid and fully electric, available on the Canadian market today. This time, 2 years from now, there'll be more than 100. So the whole issue of there isn't one I like, or I need an SUV, or I need these features, I'm a Toyota person, I'm only buying a Toyota, all these types of issues are going away. And surprisingly, brand loyalty and things really do play an important role in the way people choose their cars, so these factors are actually, they matter to people. So I'd say number 1, consumer knowledge, still a huge issue. Number 2, range anxiety is still a thing. Interestingly, I mean, it was interesting to see Sanjeev's data because his data showed that those superchargers seem to be making a difference. When you ask people, when you ask them what is their reason for not choosing electric, number 1, far and away, anyone guess? Like way far and away, number 1 reason why they're not choosing electric car. That's what I would have thought was the range would have been the reason. I assumed it was range, but what it was, like 3-to-1 cost. People thought that EVs were expensive. And it's really interesting because, of course, if you learn more about the market, there are lots of choices down in the lower price points. But people are not aware of that. So Tesla's kind of been a bit of a plus and minus, right? Tesla's been a big plus for the EV because when I started talking about EVs, like people didn't even know what I was talking about. At least with Tesla, people have heard of it, they know what it is, they've seen it, so that's helped. On the negative, they equate EVs with expensive. It's for rich people, it's become kind of synonymous with a bit of an elitist thing, which is quite an unfair characterization, but yet that's sort of the way it's gone. And so, interestingly, like that's the thing that consumer education has to help fight, which is actually there are lots of vehicles at different prices. In terms of range was number 2 concern. About like 33% said cost, and about 12% of the people said range. And range is going away, though, as an issue. Why? Batteries getting bigger, range of vehicles getting better, prices coming down, and infrastructure popping up. So that combination means range stops being the thing that's stopping people. So as that one goes away, though, the consumer knowledge thing continues. So we still have a lot of work to do, but I think, you know, there's lots of positive movement. Okay, so we developed our key messages based on all this feedback that we've got from consumers. So we heard cost, right? So we said, hey, and you saw this in Sanjeev's messages too. EVs save money, EVs reduce emissions, in that order. Now, it'd be great to think you could just pump up that environmental message. I can tell you in Ontario, it doesn't sell that well. I mean, that's just a fact. People, it's not that people don't care about the environment, of course they do, but it's like a secondary issue compared to the money. And that's just the reality of a lot of people's lives. So we are trying to make sure that our messaging resonates with what people think, right? So, hey, you save money, and by the way, you also really reduce emissions. And in Ontario, plugging in an EV at night, it's more than 90% of emission reduction. It's huge. Here, you heard from Sanjeev, it's still really good. It's not as good because you're still running some fossil fuels on the grid. But every year, what other car could you drive where every year it gets a little bit cleaner? It's still a really good story, and I think you have to remember, like, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be better. And then these two sort of subsidiary messages was, charging is not a big deal, because people also imagine, like, where am I gonna do this? How am I gonna do this? It sounds difficult. And I think part of the thinking around that is that we're all walking around with a gas station mindset, which is we're used to going out and getting our fuel somewhere, right? Like at some station somewhere. And when you tell people, oh, don't worry about it, you're just gonna plug in at home at night, super convenient, it's great. People are like, they can't really imagine that because they never did that. So I like to kind of make the analogy to the switch from Blockbuster to Netflix, which was we used to all go out and get our videos. And I mean, we thought it was okay, right? Because that was all there was. And we went out there and you chose your video and then you always returned it late because the kid misplaced it. And anyway, it was a hassle, right? But you did it. And then all of a sudden, you had this service that was at home, it was cheaper, it was more convenient, it was like better in every way. And then everyone just switched. Now, obviously a $9.99 prescription or subscription is a lot, you know, it's not comparable to a car. But I think the analogy holds in that EVs have all those benefits. It's just people haven't learned it or they don't know it yet. And so it's the same thing. You're going to do it at home. It's easier. It's cheaper. It's better for the environment. Why wouldn't you do it? So when that price parity comes, as Sanjeev's slides really showed, it's going to happen. And we know it's going to happen. It's happening now. And so this isn't an if, you know, it's just a when. And there's a lot of disagreement amongst like experts about when that will be. But we know that it will be. And finally, you know, the message around makes and models. Just like there is one that's going to be good for you. And we just have to get the exposure up to help people see that that's the case. And that's really challenging in a province like Nova Scotia, where you probably don't have too many EV certified dealers. And so you're not going to see a lot of EVs around. You're not going to see the new makes and models that we're seeing in Toronto. Unfortunately, we're not even seeing them all in Toronto. Then you go to California, you see a whole bunch more. So there's sort of these levels of accessibility to the vehicle. So one of the things we'd really like to see is more EV certified dealers that actually have the car on the lot, give people a chance to actually see and drive them. That's a big challenge. So the Discovery Center, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Love to have you folks visit us there. The idea, as I said, one-stop shop. Our biggest supporters are all the utilities, TD Bank, Power Workers Union. Most folks are in the electricity sector who support it. We did have some government funding as well. You may have heard we had a little change of heart in Ontario with a change in government. I won't get into it too much, except to say, you know, EVs weren't high on their agenda. And it's been a little bit of a challenge since that happened, but we're going to survive and thrive in the end. And the important thing to remember when that kind of thing happens, or though it's disappointing when those things happen, and I'm sure those things happen in every jurisdiction, governments change and their priorities change. The important thing to remember is Canada is a small market country. Ontario is a small market province inside a small market country. We don't determine what cars get made. China, the US, and Europe decide. And we will get those cars whether we have an incentive or not, eventually. You know, this is happening. It doesn't matter what the philosophy of our particular government is. So it's not the death knell for anything. It just might mean it's going to take a bit longer than we would have liked. So you'll see the philosophy of the center, I like to say, is sort of science center meets car showroom. People come and do all kinds of interactive fun learning, then they test drive the car. We have lots of fun stuff for kids so that if the parents want to drive the car, the kids can play while they're waiting. And we make it a thing that people can come on a Saturday, try every make and model we've got. And by the time they walk out the door, they're convinced their next car will be electric. And whether that's in the next 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, you know, it'll happen. And then what we do is we track them to see what they really did do in the end and see how it's working. And I have some good data on that. So we have EV specialists that help everyone. So this is a physical bricks and mortar place, but we still realize there are lots of people who don't live in striking distance of this place. So we still have continued with what I will call our EV roadshow, which is all we had before we had the center, which is where we would go to a community with a few cars and chargers and sort of pop up and help people where they are. So that continues in all the towns and cities outside of the GTHA. And we do that because, of course, we want everyone to be able to get on board with EV, not just people who live in the GTHA. And so we created also an event venue in our space, and that turned out to be really inspired because we thought when we set it up, well, we'll host meetings there. We'll host workshops and stuff, but we didn't really think of the opportunity of all the other companies that might want to book this place and host events there. And we're booking out 3 to 4 days a week as an event venue. And we're getting companies, sure, electricity, clean tech, NGOs, like, it's a cool place to have a meeting. And so on the breaks, they can test drive cars. So you're bringing in people. So we kind of got the dual thing going. We've got the people who heard about us, who come in, walk in, and they're ready to learn. And then you got the people who came because their boss said to come. And those people are like, hey, I never really thought about this. You're getting people earlier in their journey, just kind of first time, but then they come back with their family. And we get them on the path of being ready. So it's been a really great thing, and also it brings in some revenue to the center, which is great for a not-for-profit trying to survive in these tough times. So that's been really good. Have to give the plug to the sponsors, supported by Ontario Power Generation. And so how are we doing in terms of data? So this is hot off the presses data. What we do is when people come in, we have an iPad sort of survey that we do. Every test driver does a survey, and they have to do it because we have to check their driver's license, and it's sort of integrated into the survey. It's quite short, but we have a pre-driving survey, then they do the drive, then a post survey to sort of see, like, how did this influence them, and then also to be able to track them and see what they did in the future. In the past, we had paper surveys, which were okay, but we couldn't kind of track people into the future that easily. And the other thing is now we have an integrated system with the automakers where we can make a direct referral, which the automakers love. So that has been really successful for us because it's like, hey, automaker, we're your friend. We're like referring people to you who are ready to buy, and they don't even have to do any really work at the dealership. They come in there ready. So now I have to say, like, we have a really good relationship with the dealers. They're happy to participate in this. And at the beginning, they were a little iffy on it. From opening, we've had about just over 7,200 test drives, and we're only counting the driver, the one driver, but usually there's 2 or 3 people that go along for the ride, so it's quite a bit higher in terms of exposure. and about 16,000 people through the doors of the center, which for us is like a huge success. We really didn't know. Like, you know, we put down on paper, like our aim was to get 10,000 in the first year, and we did better than that, so we were just so happy. There was actually like a huge run on the center for a period of time, sort of April, May, June, just before the rebates got canceled, and I think a lot of people predicted the rebates would be canceled, so there was sort of a craze, like where we just had like hundreds of people coming every day. It was crazy. It has slowed down, but what I will say is it is creeping back now, because we're getting people coming in on a weekend saying, you know what, I'm doing it anyway. I'm committed to this. This is going to be my next car. So we're optimistic. It's creeping back. The other thing that we did is when we do the pre and the post survey, and in the post survey we ask people, so are you more likely now than you were before to buy an EV? And pretty much everyone was saying yes, like 96% of the people. And we thought, well, that's great. You know, that's positive. But, you know, you can say anything in a survey. You can say yes, and we don't know if they really did go and choose an EV. So now we're able to track them through this online system, and we survey them at 6 months, at 3 months, and then at 6 months. And our latest survey at the 6-month mark was, so did you choose an EV? And we got a 33% had already bought the car, and 90% said within the next year that they would. So we're seeing really good results. And the other thing that kind of verifies that is when we ask people if they're willing to be referred to a dealer, about 30% were saying yes, which kind of is about the same as the 33% that bought the car. So a few people bought it without, I guess, without going to a dealer, but most are visiting the dealer and choosing the car. So we're seeing, and the auto folks tell me that those are great stats. Like, they cannot get anywhere near that. So we're really proud of those. And then, you know, we can compare that to our stats when we do a road show, which is like you go to a community. And now you can imagine the conversions are not going to be quite as good with that kind of setup. Why? Well, you're just showing up at a community event, right? So the people didn't come there specifically thinking they were interested in EV. They might have come there because it's great ribs at Rib Fest or whatever whatever the event is. And then they're like, oh, that's interesting. So you have to think about it more like the roadshow events are for awareness raising. It might be the first time anyone even saw an EV or thought about it. So it's kind of earlier in the journey, right? So we're seeing like, yeah, we got lots of interactions, we're exposing people, and then they need like one more thing to happen in order to get them to convert over to sales. So, you know, it does take time. You can't expect people the very first time they're ever going to see it to be ready. They have lots of questions. So I mentioned that we have lots of events at the center, and we've sort of done a little breakdown like who's coming. And we're getting about, in terms of events, we get about 40% corporate type bookings, then about, almost 15% government, then about 20% not-for-profit, and then we have a combination of like public outreach events and youth events. So kind of a nice mixture of all the different groups that want to host something at the center. So it's been quite rewarding to see like how that's all playing out. And I mean, eventually we need places like this probably everywhere in the country if we really want to succeed at getting people on board with electric cars. This is not so easy, you know, to get people on board. They've been doing the gas car thing for 100 years. And it's taken a long time to get people comfortable with that infrastructure, and this is different. And even though those of us who work in this, it just makes so much sense, it's cheaper, it's better, like why wouldn't you just, but it's for a lot of people because they've only heard certain anecdotes, it's a difficult decision for them. So you do have to give them the opportunity to really learn without the pressure to buy anything. So the other thing we added to the center, which really has helped, is we created this home charging zone. And we did that again because we found there was a gap in the marketplace. The automakers are not equipped to help people with the home charger. They don't really understand it. They don't know how much money they're going to save. They don't know all the different makes and models. And we found actually there was nobody who actually was doing this was like, sure, there's like an individual company that will sell you an individual home charger, but there was no one kind of with a whole lineup of all the different types, and why would you choose one over the other? Well, I have a garage, I don't have a garage. I have a long driveway, I need a long cord, or I need a higher amperage because I've got a Tesla, I've just got a plug-in hybrid Volt. Like, what do I need? And people had all these questions, and the auto dealers just couldn't answer them. And so we created an online store, and actually, of course, it's accessible to anybody, including here, an online store with all the makes and models, plus a 1-800 number where you could call and ask all those questions to figure out which one might make sense for you. And we found this has really helped people get over the, like, home charging is going to be hard thing. And as Sanjeev said, like about 80% of the people plug in at home at night. That is the typical pattern. And public charging, although it's important psychologically, it's not as important to people's day-to-day. This is what they really need day-to-day. So, and by the way, like if it's a plug-in hybrid, they don't even need this. They could just get away with the 110 outlet that comes with the car, the 110 cord set. A lot of people don't know that they could just get away with what the car provides. As long as you got an outlet, that's all you need. And so a lot of people need help with this, and so we've tried to fill the gaps. And a lot of what Plug and Drive is doing is just like gap filling. And as I mentioned to some of my colleagues at Clean last night, I said to them, you know, I hope I'm going to work myself out of a job. I mean, this should just become so obvious, and the dealers will be up to it, and all the infrastructure will be there, and then why would you need a Plug and Drive like out there promoting it? But it probably won't happen quite as fast as I would like, but you know, that's my retirement dream, that I'm gonna work myself right out of it. Our online store has seen a massive uptick in business. We went from selling like a couple of chargers a month to selling 30 or so chargers a month. We did see a little bit of a drop when the rebates got canceled. Again, we're seeing a build back up. And we're also seeing a lot more commercial chargers going in. A lot of companies are stepping up where the government stepped back. They're stepping up because they realize it's something good for their employee retention, for their own sustainability program, and it's a nice perk to offer employees. And then once you do that, then the company might do a lunch and learn, teach their employees about EV, and the next thing you know, studies in California have shown that people are 6 times more likely to choose EV if they have workplace charging. They might not even need the workplace charging, but just that having it gave them that comfort to choose it, and then they could use it or not use it, you know, depending on their situation. So that is really important, and that's something that can be done without any kind of incentives. Companies can do that now. So that's something that can really help seed the market in this time where a lot of provinces don't have any incentive program. So to sum it up, what we've found is sort of a little bit of a recipe for success that we've hit on in Ontario is sort of a public-private partnership is key because, as you've heard, governments change and you never want to be 100% reliant on that. And also that no-pressure sales thing. We're an independent third party, a trusted party. People don't trust the automakers that much either. And so having that independent party, a lot of the automakers want us to come and explain to people that it really is beneficial. It's not just them saying so. And so we found that's been a success. Like I said, having that event venue has really helped us be sustainable. And finally, one sort of surprise that came out of the center was we figured, you know, people would go through the process and we would refer them to a dealer, and they would hopefully choose the car, great. But what ended up happening is a lot of dealers ran out of cars. And I'm sure you have this here, where a lot of them just don't have them. And so those dealers started referring people to us. And they said, go over to Plug and Drive, because they know we're not in competition with them. We're not going to sell anything. So go over to Plug and Drive, try the car. If you like it, you can order it. So we've helped a lot of dealers with zero supply make a sale. So suddenly we're you know, they like us a lot. So that's been good. I'm going to wrap it up, but I wanted to just show you, like, this is Ontario, how we're doing. You saw how Nova Scotia's doing. you're up to about 200 and something cars. We're like away to the races in comparison, but again, we had rebates for a number of years. And you can see we're up to about 35,000 vehicles today. It was about 31 at the end of Q3 in Ontario. And that includes plug-in hybrids and fully electrics. It was about half and half. Now we're seeing a drop in plug-in hybrids and more people going for full battery electrics. You heard that question earlier. You know, someone asked, well, you know, what's happening? Well, a lot of automakers are going to stop making plug-in hybrids, although they're still really popular here in Canada. So I hope they all don't do that, because it does help people transition. And we like to joke that plug-in hybrid is the gateway drug. It's like you can get them on there, they get the hang of it, they still have gas on board, they're not as scared, and the next one will be 100% electric. So I'm glad that those choices are there for people. It helps with fear. It really does. And so you see that they're still projecting that we're going to double year over year. I think we have to dampen our expectations a little bit without rebates. There is some talk that the feds may do something. I'm not super optimistic that they'll do it pre-election at this point, but I think, you know, at some point we will see a federal ZEV program of some sort. You know, I hope so. And here's how we're doing in Canada. About 70,000 vehicles Canada-wide. Most of those in the 3 rebate provinces, which is Ontario, Quebec, and BC. Relatively small numbers everywhere else, but growing. And as Sanjeev said, Model 3 has bumped those up, and a few other Tesla models have. So we're seeing, actually, Canada's ranked right now about number 10 in the world, which isn't bad for like a small country with a very spread out auto market, like 12 markets across the country. It's not the easiest place to sell electrics. If you imagine, like, Canada altogether has about the same number of people as California has. You know, so if you were an automaker and you could go to California in one state and they've got really progressive policies, or you can send vehicles to a million little markets across Canada, like, what would you do? Well, that's why we can't get any cars. We've got stiff competition, and there's not making them in big enough volumes that everyone can get them. I mean, they sell them specifically into the really hot markets. That's China, that's California, New York State, and that's Europe. And Canada's just getting like a really tiny slice of that. And we have to show that we want them to get them. So I'm going to wrap it up there. You heard about I thought it would just be nice to see how we're doing here in Nova Scotia, but Sanjeev nicely showed that. And just to give you optimism, look at how much your infrastructure has grown over like the past 4 years. This is a huge, huge change. You had 0 level 3s up until like a year and a half ago. And now you've got all kinds of good infrastructure. That's a great start. And so lots of progress being made here. You can see, like, China drives the market, and automakers are making cars for them, not for us. We will still get the EVs, it'll just take longer. And, you know, ultimately it's going to happen. We're going to see 13 million EVs on the roads within a year and a half. That's worldwide. Lots of those, probably almost half of those in China, but still, that's a huge number. It cannot be ignored. This year, BMW sold 8% of their vehicles were plug-in. That's a big percentage for a worldwide automaker. So you're starting to see where these numbers like really start to matter to the automakers. And that's why you see GM doing what they're doing, which is plans to go all electric. Same with Volkswagen, same with BMW. The largest automakers in the world are all planning to electrify every make and model they make. So this is, like I said, it's not if, it's just a when. And so if you have this issue of condo, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. We've tried to do some work on it. Huge challenge, difficult to pull off, much better to do when you're building the condo than do a retrofit. I know many of you are working on this. It's a big challenge in the GTA where like 30% of people live in multi-unit. And so that's still something that we have to work on. And I just wanted to conclude with a comment about used. When rebates go away, or have never been, as in your case, don't forget about used electric cars. There are more and more coming out on the market. You know, now the 2013s, 2014s, 2015s even are coming off lease. There's a supply of tens of thousands in the US that can be brought up. They're affordable. They are, yeah, sure, they're the earlier gens, so they don't have as big of a battery range, but for the right use, second car, city driving, you know, for the right driving, these can really make sense and are super cheap, and you're still going to save on your fuel and all that. And I think that we all have to do a better job promoting that as an alternative for people. We're about to launch a big used program in Ontario because we realize like we need to do something in the interim while we don't have incentives on new. And so I think that's something that could work really well here. You're well positioned for that. So that's something I would recommend. And we're hoping we're going to be out here maybe in the summer. Stay tuned to try to expose more Nova Scotians to EVs. That's the end of my formal remarks, except to say if you follow the EV news, last week Shell bought Greenlots. Now, Greenlots is an EV charging network, really big in the US and in Asia. I mean, the writing is on the proverbial wall. I mean, it's like if Shell is buying a charging network, they know this is where their business is going and they have to be part of it. You see Petrocan installing chargers at gas stations. I mean, they have to catch up now. They know this is happening, and we see countries banning gas cars, automakers electrifying everything, so we're going there. It's with efforts of groups like yours and mine that will help it be faster. Those of us who really believe climate change is a crisis, we need it to happen as fast as possible. So with that, I would love to take your questions.